CMMS Radio talks about all things CMMS, computerized maintenance management software, focused on maintenance management. It's the people, the process, and the culture that make your CMMS journey a success. Thank you for tuning in, everyone. Today, you see him on screen right now, we're going to meet Colin Morris, and Colin Morris is the Director of Solution Consulting at MaintainX. A lot of you might know MaintainX. We're going to talk a little bit about that, but we want to get into CMMS, some reliability stuff. He has been in the CMMS and related spaces for a decade, and I would say that's in multiple what I call customer facing roles, where you're working with customers, you're trying to help them understand software, you're trying to understand what they're really doing in their environment, what problems are they having, and can you solve them? We are going to chop it up about all of that. Colin, welcome to CMMS Radio.
Thanks, Greg. Excited to be here.
Yeah, it's and we've been working on this for, I don't know, a week or two. I know I put a post out and I was like, hey, who's gonna come in here and talk to me about this stuff? And it was really cool that we could get you on schedule and fit this in, because I know you're constantly doing these demos. I'm assuming that you also step in when maybe there's a client account and they need some extra insights on, well, how do I really do this? Where is this going to show up on a report, and why does that really matter? So I kind of want to get into all of that. But one quick question. Since it's your first time on CMMS Radio, I want to understand something I couldn't necessarily read about myself. How did you get into the maintenance and or CMMS space in the first place? Like what got you here?
Yeah, so throughout school, actually, I worked as a part of our line at a food manufacturing facility, actually. So part of my job was doing some of the maintenance activities, ensuring that our chillers and our different systems were working properly. And so that was my first introduction to that. After that, I actually became a maintenance technician at my university. So that was also my job for a period of time, maintaining the different HVAC units, doing motor changes, doing all that. So lived the actual career for a period of time, though limited, and had an opportunity to join Fix early days here in Toronto, and got addicted to the industry, to say the least, from there, and have been working within the CMMS space for just over 7 years at this point.
Yeah, and that's and I was kind of counting one of your stops prior to Fix, and well, now you're at MaintainX, and I've learned quite a bit about MaintainX, and this is far less about like the product itself. It's more about these conversations. So one thing that I think is really important for what you do, who you work with, is that you've done some of it. That makes a really big difference. And I myself, in my past life, being in the CMMS space, was always kind of looking for ways to help people understand what they're really doing, especially if people came into the organization that we had that were going to work with people and they didn't know the industry. Because we
Hmm.
sometimes would bring people in that were just good, strong candidates, and we would teach them about these things, about maintenance management, work order management, all that kind of stuff. So when you apply this in your current role, right, and even over these years, when you're engaged with a potential client or an existing client, how often do you find that they don't really know how to navigate their own situation? Or is it more common that they understand and know the problem and root cause of what they're trying to solve?
I would say the mass majority of our customers have a very high level understanding in terms of what they're trying to accomplish, what they're trying to track. Fundamentally, majority of the time, they're coming from a system that's broken. So they know something is wrong, but they don't know what good looks like ultimately. And they heavily rely on our organization to be able to give some guidance. What are best practices? How are things performing? How can we improve things? And fundamentally, the goal of our system is to make maintenance easier. We don't want to have people stuck spending a whole bunch of time filling out paper and getting away from what we all want to do, which is fixing equipment fundamentally. And so there's definitely an opportunity for, us at MaintainX to provide some of that knowledge. We have over 10,000 customers globally. And so we've seen just about every type of industry. And ultimately, we can use that experience to help ensure that they're going to be successful.
Yeah. Yeah. That's and again, that's how we kind of try to put it all together. Now, you've had some exposure, at least some exposure to reliability and reliability best practices. Do you do you find that engaging with all these different people over these years, you kind of start to learn that without having sought out that learning? Does it start to sink in?
I would definitely say so. I'm by no means an engineer. I worked in maintenance for a period of time, but definitely was not on the reliability side of things. At the facility I was working at, it was very run to failure, as a lot of our customers are experiencing at this point. But over the time, having different conversations, going through these different evaluations with customers, I've definitely picked up a lot of the knowledge and understanding. I'm by no means an expert. I like to say I know enough to be dangerous, but can't consult on it by any means. And fundamentally, it's a lifestyle. You see it every way, everywhere in your life. Fundamentally, you think about your car, you think about your house, you think about everywhere else, and you're like, I wonder if I change this one little thing, could I get my car to run better or run longer? And fundamentally, it's something that I don't think people always think about, of just how much reliability impacts our daily lives.
Yeah, I like you saying it that way because we just everybody generally tends to take a lot of things for granted, and when you spend time around like true, real, bona fide maintenance experts, you start to hear and understand it a little bit differently. And I too, certainly am not a reliability expert. I have a lot of friends that are like the real deal, like nothing they can't handle. And then when they run into something that they don't really know, they'll actually go, wait a second, we gotta bring in some horsepower, some firepower on this. I say firepower all the time. I don't mean it as a bad thing. Um, Now, over your career, this is just a personal question of mine. If you had to just throw a general number, how many engagements do you think you've touched and been involved in? Would it be, like thousands, or does it start to tick up to the 10K plus mark?
I'd probably say still in the thousands at this point. Getting up there. Have definitely had a lot of different conversations with a lot of different folks at this point, to say the least.
Yeah. Do you when you engage and do demonstrations, are they always online in a virtual web environment, or do you go on site and do those as well?
I think going on site is hugely important to actually understand the customer challenges. So, see what the day in the life looks like, understand the environment, and actually walk their facility gives a lot more understanding in terms of how we can solve their problems. That being said, mass majority of our engagements are still online. So, doing that remotely is also an option in this day and age, getting somebody to walk us through the facility or see how things are done. But I definitely value that in person time a lot more.
And so I'm gonna take all that and then ask this other question. Are there any particular environments or industries that excite you more than others? And that's not to say that the ones you don't say are left out. It's more like, are there some that you're really, really passionate about? Like for me, I used to get super excited about nonprofit organizations, but then, the next week I'm talking to manufacturers and it's like, man, I'm just as excited about this. But do you have a favorite or a couple of favorites?
I've really been enjoying the battery technology as of recent, with the growth of electric cars and renewable resources when it comes to lithium batteries and recycling processes. I think it's a really interesting market. They're changing, innovating incredibly fast, and so the technology is also very new and different. So it's been really interesting to talk to some of those clients recently.
I bet. Well, personally, I'm in a generation where I'm kind of resistant to some of that stuff because it's like, man, this is too much change. Whereas you might be part of the next generation or the one after that, where it's like, hey, this is a real thing. Let's look at what those benefits are. Do you, when engaged with clients and fielding questions, whether they're coming from paper and pencil, Excel spreadsheets, or whatever they're using, and they want to actually get into a full blown CMMS, are you finding that you can often discover something they've overlooked when you're on the engagement about how they can add a little bit more value to their process? And what I'm talking about there is there's a concept that you need to have good, strong foundational elements in place and a great culture. So people and process or processes, and then the technology fits in. So I'm kind of curious, like how often that comes up for you when you're on the engagement and you discover something or show something where those potential clients or existing clients have these light bulb moments. And if you could share one.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest ones that I always see is just the concept of you can get rid of that whiteboard that you have sitting right next to that machine. Like everything that you are looking at, reviewing right now, that can all be digital for you. And it's probably going to take you less time to actually fill out that information through OT technologies, through people entering information onto a tablet than you think. Ultimately, our like applications are not as difficult as they used to be as a barrier to entry at this point. It is pretty easy for the 60-year-old technician to pick up and type something into a screen than it is for him to remember to go back to that whiteboard and actually fill it out. And the amount of customers that still have those sitting next to their maintenance office, next to the machine they're operating on is incredible, honestly. And just the relief that you see on some people's faces where I go, you can get rid of that. And they go, well, that's been here for 15 years. I can't get rid of that.
they look, I'm going to admit I'm one of them. And I used to not only sell the technology, but I used to support the technology and do the account management process and help with different parts of teams that were kind of resistant. So I always kind of, I got it, right? They're not saying we've always done it this way. They're saying, if you're paying close attention, they're saying, I'm very resistant to change because this has been successful for me and I'm really good at my job, but sometimes I don't have time to go over and look at that whiteboard and update it because I'm doing three things, but they're going to get done. So I think that's always kind of a constant challenge, but there's been more adoption. I mean, obviously, you're paying attention, as an organization to what makes it easier for people to buy in and leverage the system. Do you find anything other than that as a common kind of barrier to frontline worker adoption where people will just fight tooth and nail? I don't want to do this. I'm not interested in the technology.
I think that the fear, uncertainty, change is the biggest challenge to anybody adopting a CMMS. It's not getting a new piece of technology. It's not, adopting something completely different outside of what you're doing today. It's just the concept of changing the way that we do something. You know, People have been doing it the exact same way for 20, 25 plus years and it works. Once you actually start to adopt that technology, I think a lot of mindsets change. Even if it's just getting it in the hands of a technician for 30 minutes. Hey, let me walk you through how do you actually track this information and close a work order. How's that compared to how you were doing it before?
Yeah.
And you'd be amazed with how many people's minds blow and they go, okay, I get it. We had a customer recently. We were on site. We walked up to him. We go, hey, how are things going with MaintainX? He was probably late 50s, early 60s. And he goes, it's going all right. And we consider that the best compliment you can get
Yeah.
because he didn't complain. He didn't say it's amazing. He said, it's all right, meaning it's doing its job. That's all I can ask.
Yeah. What's good about that is, maintenance people are most typically going to tell you straight right out of the gate. I mean, uh, unafraid. Maybe they're afraid of too much change, and I think in fairness, there's some good reason for that. Too often out here in this world of maintenance management, CMMS, which we care about, right? We care about manufacturing facilities. You were doing some of this work at an actual university. I mean, that's really important, and a lot of people don't realize what I mean by that. And when we get these little bits of direct feedback, the the reason they don't want to see too much change too fast is they've seen a lot of that over their careers, and they've seen that sometimes it was unnecessary and it caused even bigger problems. So I wanted to ask about the training aspect because you're sometimes involved in that, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Do you tend to find training with those groups that are a little bit more resistant, and or the groups that are willing to jump in, is more effective when you do on-site training, or do you find it is as effective or even better sometimes to do it virtually?
I think sometimes it's more effective to do it virtually, honestly. It gives people a little bit more space. It gives people a little bit more understanding in terms of how it's going to work in their day to day. Having that remote training can sometimes let people feel a little bit more confident in what they're doing. You know, you don't have somebody hovering over your shoulder, looking down. It's not like school again. You know, you don't have the teacher saying, "Hey, what are you actually working on?" And so when we go about training, we actually use our system to provide that training. So we'll actually assign a work order out to somebody. Hey, here are the 5 steps that you need to take before we chat again in 2, 3 days. And that also enables them to use the system. They can do it when they can have time fundamentally because we can't take people off the floor for 3, 4, 6 hours to actually walk through the system, and it gives them a little bit of autonomy as well. You know,
Yeah.
we want to make sure that they can do it themselves, and walking through clicking the buttons in a classroom setting, it's great, it works, but does that actually mean they're going to go back and do it when they're on their own? And so we've had a lot of success with remote training, honestly.
Yeah, one of the things I've often, I guess, preached. I don't know if that's the right word, but the thing that I like to explain to people over these years, even now, and I'll do it again, I'll do it forever, is that you have to find different strategies for breaking through that resistance that you might have, unto yourself. And one of the things that we used to do way back in my day was we would follow a train the trainer philosophy, so to speak, build a strong group within any organization that was clientele that has kind of immense knowledge, but then we wanted to break things out so that there was role specific training, because there are people that are critical components and parts of these organizations, right, all the way down to the janitor. And that's not meant to be anyone's above one another. I mean, we get that, but the idea is to give them the training that they need, always make sure they understand the why behind it. And I'm wondering how often this comes up for you in demonstrations, where you're mid demo, you're at the end of the demo, it's the second demo, and you're still getting lots of questions. Well, how are you really going to teach this? And what are we going to do when there's a problem? Is that pretty common amongst clients still to this day?
Honestly, we don't get that too often. I think we're fortunate where we built the application so easy you can pick up and use it a lot of the times. Um, we like to say if your mom can use Facebook, you can probably use our application
Hmm.
fundamentally. Nobody does a training course on how to use Facebook. Nobody does a training course on how to use Twitter. That should be the same for maintenance software. So I think a lot of the time our customers and anybody we're talking to can see that from day one. There's always going to be some nuance and additional training, especially for those people that are administrating the system. You know, there's some configuration and tools that you can use to change the way that we do things, but fundamentally, your application needs to be as easy as Facebook is to use. And
Yeah.
so if you should be able to see how it's going to work in your lifetime and environment, and if you didn't explain that by the second conversation, something's gone wrong in my opinion.
So let's pretend, so to like we're in an engagement, and I ask you a question about, how do you leverage the CMMS without, getting into necessarily like the product itself or the features, but to optimize preventive maintenance so that you can potentially minimize unplanned downtime?
So I think there's a few different ways that you can do that. The biggest is always just going from calendar based. So starting with what we do, looking at the OEM manuals and doing recommendations. I think there's a lot of additional options to do OT technology. So integrating into different softwares to be able to pull in that type of data to help simplify that process, understand those thresholds, and ultimately take the human out of it. So let the technology, let the asset tell you when you actually need to do maintenance. And fundamentally, we need to meet you where you're at. Not everybody's going to be able to do that OT integration from day one, but there's a ton of different recommendations out there on how we can do the calendar maintenance from day one and help grow you into those future technologies in the future.
Any kind of like a specific question or like a series of questions that you tend to leverage during a demonstration when someone asks something like that to kind of find out a little bit more before you take a shot at answering it?
Yeah. The first question is, how much planned maintenance do you actually do today?
Mm,
Because I always find the person that's like, we need predictive maintenance is running to failure 90% of the time. And so we need to get back to fundamentals before we can start, prescribing how we're going to do things based upon your information. And understanding where they're at is ultimately going to guide how we present a solution and actually talk about the impact we're going to have. Because you can't go from breakdown maintenance to predictive overnight. There's no silver bullet for that. You got to get to, the fundamentals. Then we can start talking about some more interesting stuff with technology. But fundamentally, you got to crawl, walk, run here uh,
yeah.
within the market.
Oftentimes, oftentimes, I don't know why they call it common because it's really not, but oftentimes it's a common sense approach to these things. Do you also find when someone, so now I'm talking about someone's actually implemented technology, they've moved forward, they're signing up with MaintainX and they started doing some stuff. Do you still this I saw this and I still see it all the time. Do you see these projects start to fall down because everybody thinks now that we've made that selection, we're back to doing our regular old work? Is that still a challenge in the market and with your clientele?
I don't think we've faced that challenge as much as it probably used to be. I definitely had experience in past where somebody would purchase a software, never actually get to that implementation phase, and ultimately choose to leave that product in the past. I think the biggest difference is people don't have a choice anymore. Maintenance is not a choice anymore when it comes to the current market, the current economy, the current labor market as well. So people have to put in these types of softwares to be successful and to be able to compete on a global market. And so more often than not, again, using your phrase in there, people are going through and executing against those implementations almost immediately. And the nice thing with the way that we approach it, it's not necessarily time constraint, it's outcome based. And
Mhm.
so if there is some variance in terms of, your schedule, we can adopt or change to that. And, we're not out there to make a buck off you and have to charge you additional hours. We want to make sure that you're going to be successful on our software. And so we just measure it based upon when you finish that implementation ultimately.
Do you also add in and again, I'm not trying to get to the secret sauce necessarily, but for people to understand experientially, what they kind of get. Uh, do you have processes in place to kind of make sure they're not forgetting to then carry on in the same fashion because our implementation, our adoption goes well, and I'll describe this scenario and you can tell me if you've experienced it. Uh, Someone like your champion that's all about the software and is really leveraging it well, they move on, different career, or God forbid something else, and somebody parachutes in and they're you know oh, I don't even know what that is. I love this system. And you have to kind of get involved and say, wait a minute, you might be making a critical mistake here because you got this strong adoption for the last year and a half and you're about to rip and replace. Do you still encounter that sometimes? Have you ever had to get involved in that?
Yeah, I would say we still encounter it every once in a while. I've also seen a lot of customers boomerang when they do make that decision. So, sometimes people are hard headed. They want to do something. They've done it. They're familiar. Again, fear, uncertainty, doubt. Um, they switch, and we've seen them come right back within 3 to 6 months. So it still happens. Doesn't happen very often by any means. We also do. We'll also put in a lot of effort to make sure that they understand why the MaintainX was ultimately selected. Bringing on people from the evaluation, talking them through what we actually did to make sure that they were going to be successful, and talking through their environment. So, yeah, there's lots we can do to help highlight exactly why you should stay with MaintainX, to say the least.
Yeah, and do you guys do the same internally, like so that you really know and understand your clients in such a way that let's say you I don't know, tomorrow you win the lottery and it's like really really big, like it's like now you literally have to go travel the world, so it's done, and somebody has to kind of slip into this role, so to speak, and learn. do you guys keep that kind of strong documentation about your clients and the calls and the
Oh yeah,
issues and all that? Okay, good,
yeah,
good.
yeah. We have kind of a dedicated customer success organization. We have our account managers, and fundamentally, they're there to make sure that we're going to be successful and keep adoption up high. And so they have a detailed understanding of what our customers do and how they do it, and we're there to ensure that they're going to be successful. And part of the reason that you get a system like MaintainX is so that you have documentation. A lot of folks don't have SOWs documented today or asset registries, and so that is the core purpose of buying a CMS, is so you don't have to worry about that knowledge transfer disappearing.
Yeah, that's you reminded me of something when you talk about asset registries and even work history awareness for organizations. Some of them incredibly large cannot, and this, what I'm doing here is I'm making a case for this concept of digitization and going on a true maintenance maturity journey, so to speak, where if I ask someone a question like, do you know how many assets you have and how many of them fall into a certain category of criticality?
Sure.
And when answers to those questions are no, we don't actually know that, it shows the kind of blind spots that make computerized maintenance management software or some kind of maintenance management software integral to organizational success like you've been talking about. And it's still so common, it's almost shocking. And then when they have to go back, they being these organizations, they even know it and they have to go back, there's a lot of pain involved in that slowdown to go and do the proper kind of research. And that's what I'm getting at is that's an area where I've always thought clients that don't have visibility to that can get more of an immediate impact, because just the simple fact of getting a solution in place, going out and gathering that data, commissioning within the system the assets you have, their criticality, setting up an asset hierarchy that makes sense, that right there is extremely valuable for them, for their organization, because now they know something where previously they might not have known anything. Would you agree with that?
I would definitely agree, and I think one of the biggest challenges for a lot of those customers is it was so difficult to get data into a CMS before. You'd have to go fill 15, 20 different fields. You'd have to walk around, take a picture of the nameplate, find the maintenance manual, and a lot of what we're focusing on right now at MaintainX is taking that challenge away. So, we have, I can't remember the number, but tens of thousands of assets published on our website. You can install an asset instantly, so you don't actually need to walk out to the floor. I had one customer where they didn't have an asset registry. They had something within their ERP. He walked around the floor and was able to collect 400 assets in 3 hours. And
Wow.
so being able to actually meet our customers where they're at, being able to give them tools to go through and create those registries without, pain, is one of the biggest things that we can do to help
Yeah.
these customers.
Yeah. I agree. And I think a lot of the CMMS providers out there have strategies for this, and these strategies aren't perfect, but they're impactful and you can slightly adjust them. I feel the same about like OEM schedules when it comes to maintenance. If you're going to do a time interval based preventive maintenance schedule, those things tend to change within the environment based on how
Hmm.
a machine is being used. You know that from
It's a starting place.
manufacturing. Yeah, it's really common. Do you do you ever have to tackle, I wanted to ask a question about KPIs and tackling kind of how you figure out which KPIs are going to matter for a given client. Now, the issue with this question is we need a lot more context. What kind of client is it? What are they doing? What are they making? And all that. But is there a general like viewpoint that you have or hold when it comes to the KPIs that really matter to make an impact on maintenance environments generally?
I think it's probably going to be a little bit different than what people normally say. Adoption. Nothing matters unless you have data. And if your technicians are not using your system on a daily basis, entering in information, capturing the associated information when it comes to completing those work orders, Mean time to repair, mean time before failure, availability, OEE, none of that matters because none of it's accurate.
Mm,
And unless you're able to track and see how often people are logging into the system, logging work orders, completing their day to day tasks within a system, nothing else matters.
that's that is an interesting way to kind of reinforce this concept that the best CMMS out there for your organization is the one that your people will use,
That's right.
bar none,
Yep.
because no input guaranteed no output. So I like that.
There's no point in checking the boxes unless people are actually going to use the system.
Mm,
You can have the most feature rich system on the market, and if nobody uses it, it's just shelfware.
yeah. Yeah. And oftentimes, I know you've heard about this. Those are really expensive dust collectors.
That's right.
It's one of my pet peeves about some of the look, I'm not here to bash anybody, but at the same time, these overly complex systems that are in environments where that was not required, I think sometimes somebody sold something. And I sometimes think that's a bill of goods.
Yeah.
It's like these magic silver bullets that simply don't exist. I mean, maybe in the movies, but point being, to add value with a CMMS, you're going to have adoption. And if you don't have that, it is essentially pointless. And checking off a box on a list of things to look and feel and seem like you're doing something is really pointless. I I've got a very tough question for you. I'm going to throw at you.
All right.
So, but before that, first I want to ask: can you describe a specific instance where you implemented a CMMS to resolve a significant maintenance challenge? And I also want to know what that challenge is. You can pick any one you want.
I think I'm going to go back to kind of the conversation or the comment that I made in terms of that one customer that was walking through collecting 400 different assets. They were 100% reactive maintenance at that point, and so they had no understanding in terms of what maintenance to perform on what assets, when, why, or how. And fundamentally, what we were able to do was quickly capture all that different data, put in very basic time-based triggers within the application to ensure that they were doing some sort of maintenance and help them reference any of their OEM manuals. They didn't even have access to those manuals.
Oh
And
yeah,
so just being able to kind of provide documentation and information for that customer to ensure that they were doing the bare minimum and start to prove out the fact that, doing maintenance matters. A lot of people forget that maintenance even exists until something breaks, and being able to show having proper maintenance practices, doing preventative maintenance on even a calendar based schedule is better than doing nothing. And that customer saw a huge increase in uptime. Why? Because they actually knew who was doing what, when, and why within their business. And fundamentally, without that, they were going to have to make a hard choice about closing that plant. And they were able to prove the fact that, it's not it's not us as people as maintenance, it's the machinery, there's issues with it, we're performing these tasks, we got to make a decision to rip and replace potentially some of these assets.
yeah, yeah. That I mean, and again, these are the kinds of things that people want to hear about so that they can think about it. And I like to talk about it so that I can get people thinking. That's really all it is. It's not necessarily about making recommendations, although I think we would all agree we recommend that you know as much as you can about your machines, the machine health, your people, your personnel, how they're moving, how can we influence, so to speak, and create the I've said so to speak a lot in this episode. Uh, to kind of the behavioral change that's necessary for that kind of movement that represents maintenance excellence. I'm passionate about it, but it's a pinnacle. It's something that you don't achieve it and then stop. You always keep that going. It's like football teams. I'm talking about like NFL, where you got to build out these fundamentals and then execute well, and then you got to keep doing that. You can't hit it and forget it with the software or anything else. The tough question, boy, this you kind of have answered this, but I want to try it out anyway.
Sure.
So I often tell people nobody cares about your product and nobody cares about your features. They care about the problem that they have to solve. So without talking about the product or features, how do you add value to maintenance departments, teams, and the organizations you serve?
I think one thing that, I'm not talking about the company by any means. I think the one thing that, at least in my experience, that has made a ton of different effort is hiring people that understand the challenges that they're facing. And
Ah,
so by bringing in people within my organization, within the business, we are able to leverage experience and exposure to a variety of different use cases to help ensure that our customers are going to be successful.
ooh,
And by being able to understand where they're at and have people that have lived that experience, we can be a more successful business. And that in turn means our customers can be a more successful business since they can leverage our consulting, in short. So rather than them having to figure out the world, you can leverage the expertise that we have in house within my organization, our implementation team, our integrations team, to make sure we can figure it out day one and not have to rip and replace the software in 2, 3, 5 years.
solid. I like it, man. I like it because that that's one of those cause for pause type questions, and that's intentional. So thank you for that. Now it's time for the fun question segment for every first timer on CMMS Radio because you've been a real sport about this, and I was really excited about doing this. So fun questions have no wrong answers. This is just a way for people to kind of get a feel for you, for Colin,
Sure.
right? You ready?
All right.
Fun question number one. What is your favorite music?
I am a very big EDM fan, so I'm very into house and techno music.
Nice, nice. Lately, thanks to a gentleman by the name of Zach Scriven over at 4.0 Solutions, you may or may not know him. He put me on to Chill Step, which is
Okay.
a form of EDM, but it's more to get into this kind of mindset and do some deep work and really cool stuff. So I've been checking that out ever since. So I just wanted to share that. Fun question number two is, what is your favorite sport or hobby? And on sport, it does not have to be one that you play. It could be one you like to watch and, kind of cheer for.
Sure. I like to watch F1. That's my go-to at this point.
I know what you're doing this weekend.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Las
Yeah.
Vegas Grand Prix. Excited to see how it goes.
Yeah.
Was an
Yeah.
interesting one last year. Hopefully they've figured out some of the kinks that they faced with the track and their reliability last year, and we'll see how it goes.
We will see. We will see. Here's the big one for the fun question segment. What is your, no wrong answers here, okay? What is
Okay.
your philosophy, perspective, anything at all when it comes to the concept of work-life balance?
That's a good one. Um, I think it's fluid. I think there's a little bit of fluidity in terms of work-life balance. There's going to be times where you are cramming, you're working hard, you got to do what you got to do to be successful, and there's going to be ebbs and flows like anything in life. And when you have that downtime, you got to value it and you got to enjoy it. And I also think it's hugely important to get away so that people don't burn out. And that's, one of the most important things is to take a break, be reflective, think about it, and hit the ground running when you get back.
Awesome stuff. Everybody, this is Colin Morris. It's Colin. Last name is Morris, Morris. You can find him on LinkedIn if you want to connect for your own conversation. And of course, check out MaintainX. And if you do and you want to talk about it, get in touch with me because I love hearing CMMS journey stories. Colin, thank you for being here with me on CMMS Radio.
Thanks, Greg. It's been a pleasure.
Did you find this episode helpful? Please send us some feedback, suggest a topic, or ask a question. Reach out to CMMS Radio if you need a co-pilot on your CMMS project. Visit cmmsradio.com and use the What's on Your Mind link. Thank you for tuning in to CMMS Radio, your resource for all things CMMS from selection to implementation to help you make better choices, learn from industry experts, and have a successful CMMS journey.